So, Chair, unselect your mute button, the one that looks like a little microphone.
Thank you very much, City Clerk. I made a mistake there. Good morning. This is the agenda for the Oxnard City Council Public Works and Transportation Committee meeting, April 28th, 2020. We'll start with a roll call, the posting of the agenda, information on that, and then a flag salute. And if Councilman McDonald could lead some flag salute, appreciate that when we get to that point.
Member Flynn.
Present.
Member McDonald.
Here.
Chair Perrello.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum, and the agenda for this meeting was posted in the City Hall kiosk on Wednesday, April 22nd.
Okay, could we stand for the flag salute, please? Brian, you want to go?
Sure. Please
Okay.
join me in saluting the flag of our nation by saying, I pledge
allegiance to the
to the
flag
flag of the
of the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have one public comment, and can the city clerk please get us in the items on public comment? There is a limit of 2 minutes per speaker on public comment items, as she informed me. I appreciate that. I believe the gentleman's name is Henry Sapin. S-A-P-I-E-N.
Henry? Hello, Henry? It says that we've been connected, but I'm not hearing him. No, that's not that one.
If he shows up during the approval of the consent agenda, we'll give him a second shot, City Clerk, or how do you?
That's up to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. If he comes on board before we go into the actual agenda body, we'll hear from him, and if he comes in later, we'll hear him before we adjourn the meeting. We did make the call, correct, City Clerk?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you very much. So moving on to the consent agenda. This consent agenda is City Clerk item approval of the minutes. The recommendation that the Public Works and Transportation Committee approve the minutes for the April 14th, 2020 regular meeting as presented. Did the rest of the committee have an opportunity to review them, and do they have a recommendation?
Move to approve.
Second.
Take the vote, please, City Clerk.
Member Flynn.
Aye.
Member McDonald.
Aye.
Chair Perrello.
Yes.
The motion to approve
Okay.
carries 3-0.
Okay, the individual has not called in yet or gotten back to us?
So the way it works is we call out to them.
Okay.
So I can attempt the call again if you want me to.
So attempt to call again. He didn't get into us during that comment. Attempt to call again and let him know that we'll let him speak at the very end of the meeting prior to adjournment if he wants to do that. Give him a time for that,
Well,
please. City Clerk.
Okay, so the call is made through the meeting. So I can try it now or I can try it later, but I'm not able to communicate with him in between time.
Mr. Chair, I'd say if we can reach him now, go ahead and let him talk now.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Okay, 1 second.
We'll try it one more time.
Okay, so it doesn't look like we're getting through.
Okay. And trying to bend over backwards here, we'll try him one more time just before we adjourn the meeting. Thank you, City Clerk. Thank you for the indulgence for the committee. Thank you. Moving to the first item of business, moving to item D, reports. Public Works Department. The subject, purchase order to Badger Meter Incorporated for water meters and parts. And if we can have the staff presenter, please read the recommendation.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Tian. I'm the Assistant Public Works Director. This morning, we bring before you a purchase order to Badger Meter, Inc. for water meters and parts. The recommendation is that the Public Works and Transportation Committee recommend the City Council approve and authorize the mayor to execute a purchase order with Badger Meter, Inc. to purchase residential, commercial, irrigation, industrial, and fire services water meters and parts in the amount of $250,000 through June 30th, 2021. Aside from, operating blending stations and the desalter, the water division staff's also responsible to install and replace water meters. And last year, the Water Division has started planning on a new type of water meters they call the Advanced Metering Infrastructures, called the AMI. And we are planning to roll out the framework and also the proposal for this type of water meter starting next fiscal year. So the plan is from now on, anytime that we purchase water meters to fail meters program, we need to coordinate with technology so that we can avoid unnecessary expenses. The AMI, which is the newer type of meter, basically how you read it is we no longer need to drive through each neighborhood or community. Basically, they can communicate the data back to our program, our server here, back and forth, just like a cellular network, cell phone communications. So it's two-way communications. You can also shut off the meters remotely, so that helps the system. So there are also some advantages of the newer type of system. It's first of all, it's lead-free. It can capture very, very low flow in both directions. And the meter itself is what we call a seal, and then it's pretty hard to tamper them. And the last thing is that this type of meters allow communications even with our customers. So basically is a customer in the future can request that through the city that they can monitor their own flow meter. You can program them per hour, what is your daily usage, what's your highest usage, and the most important thing is if there's any minor leaks in your system, it can detect and send you an alarm. So in January of this year, the Water Divisions issue a request for bid. The reason is that we can't wait till the new contract to start. It's because we have failed meters throughout the city, so we have to replace them. So we issue an RFP on January 14, 2020, and closes February 17 of this year. We received 3 bids. And through the evaluation process by our Water Division manager, the operations manager, and a management analyst, Badger Meter was the only bidder that qualified and meet the specifications. And the other 2 doesn't. It's because one of them does not have cellular network, and the other one did not meet the lead content in our requirements. So for financial impact, the total value of this agreement is $250,000 for 1 year, 12 months. We're planning to spend about $60,000 of them this year. and the remaining of the balance of the contract will be in our next fiscal year budget. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Ms. City Clerk, I have no
Yeah.
speaker cards on this item.
Correct.
Okay, I want to make a comment before I ask the committee members. I did, in the past, attend a presentation at the Water Department where a couple of different varieties of meters were shown to the Water Department and interested parties. I just need to disclose that. Okay, do the committee members have a comment?
I just have a question, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
If there's a failure to the cellular system, the cellular backbone that collects data, is there a backup process to collect data, or do we just have to wait till that system comes back up?
Councilman McDonald, do you mean after we convert everything to the cellular system?
Correct. Once we switch these new meters to the AMI system, I presume we're going to use a cellular network backbone, correct?
Yes.
And if that system fails, is there another way to collect data off of those meters?
Yes, I think you have to go through not basically using another network to connect them. I think we have to do some field work to be able to collect them, but not necessarily go to each single meter and read them.
Okay. It's just something to think about, because very rarely does the cellular system fail, but it does fail. And depending on what type of failure it experiences, that may be a detriment to us.
That's a good question. Do you have any more questions?
No, that's all. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Mayor, do you have any questions? Mayor? Yeah, okay. I have a few questions, Mr. Ng. I appreciate the fact about the no lead, and I know that's been a very big issue based on, common sense, but also what happened in Flint, Michigan. The question with respect to I'm just going to touch by a couple things you mentioned here. The question that it can alert the customer of potential leaks. We often come across residents that will let us know that they've had a leak in their foundation because the piping was in the foundation, and they didn't realize over a long period of time that the warm spot in the floor was because there was a leak in the system. And can they get some reimbursement, or are they able to get some recovery because they didn't actually use the water, that it was lost because of a leak? I think the idea of letting customers know with this, opportunity to capture this with the system is a good one. The ability to potentially save costs because we would not need to have drive-by to capture the data, that's a good point. I do believe that Councilmember McDonald's question is very good, because if we lose the cellular data or cellular system, whatever the proper terminology would be, does that system capture the information over a period of time so that we don't lose, say, a significant portion of time where we have the ability to charge the water? Or do we just go back and go, well, they average this over a year, so we'll charge that? That's one question. And in the presentation that I saw, there was there are different descriptions. For the public, I think to myself, how do you compare one apples and oranges and this? The next time you're in the car and you're driving down the street and you come to a stoplight, take a look at the car next to you and take a look at the wheel. See if you can see the lug nuts. The common sense of looking at the lug nuts on cars, and you'll see some have 10, some got 8, some got 6, some got 5, some even have 3, some have 4. Getting a system that is consistent so that we buy one set of parts that covers everything we got versus having all kinds of different size wheels and have to get the right size wheel for the right size system is a very smart move. Should have been done years ago, but things happen, and I support this. I believe that the staff put the time and effort into this thing. I will wait to hear if the mayor has a comment, but I think that Councilman McDonald's question needs to have a little bit, a clearer answer. And Mr. Tien, you did a great job of answering, but just make sure that we bring that up to the full council when this comes to the full council. And those are my comments. If there's a question, if there could be an answer about the you know, leaks and how that would work, and if there would be a break on the person that they found that they had a leak and they came for money, if that can be answered, I'd appreciate that. If not, Mayor, do you have a comment or a question? I can't see him and I don't hear him, so, does somebody want to take a shot at my question about if there's a leak? Please?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I can't answer the part of the questions about the refund. What I can
Okay.
what I can talk about is with this new system, how to detect the leak. The system itself is smart enough that over a period of time, for each household, detect the behavior, meaning that it can kind of figure out, when it's the highest water usage, when it's the minimum water usage. So if there's an abnormal behavior, let me give you an example. For my household, the behavior is everybody goes to bed early. But somehow my college son comes home, it changes out the cycle. That's where the computer would detect midnight, someone is using water. It will send an alarm to the city or whoever that it's requested it to say, you might have a leak because at this time of the hour, you have water flowing through the meter.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was a good example. That's a common
Mr.
sense
Chair-
example. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, two things. First of all, I'm pretty certain we can't do the refunds if the leak is on your residential pipes.
Okay.
And God help us if there's a program that monitors eating in the middle of the night.
Or watching close at 2 o'clock in the morning. Okay, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have said that.
So, Committee Member Perillo?
Okay, yes, thank you, Mayor.
I'm sorry, I had to sign back on for some reason. The audio wasn't working. And that comment by the city manager, I think, was directed towards me, and I'm proud of it. I do eat in the middle of the night. So, I have to get up and eat. But my question for the Assistant Public Works Director is more centered around cost efficiencies. How many, when is it projected that every city or every customer will have one of these meters?
Mr. Mayor, for our program, the MMI program, we're projected that it's going to take about at least 4 to 5 years to finish all the 40+ thousand customers that we have in the city.
I see. Okay. Perfect. And as far as efficiency is concerned, you were talking about there could be water leaks, and it's going to help alert people to water leaks and things of that nature. Do we have any idea? I mean, and I don't need to know the exact percentage, but I mean, is it one of these things where through this automation that maybe there's a 5% overall water savings based on just the artificial intelligence that's gained from this?
Let's talk about, instead of using the word, Mr. Mayor, talk about water saving. Let's talk about water losses, meaning that, sometimes the flow is low enough, the meter are not able to detect. Traditionally, through the reporting process, Oxnard has been reporting, under 10%. But the new reporting has changed. And as you remember, a couple months back, one of our water conservation coordinator brought back an agenda item indicating that starting in 2 years, we have to report what is every household's interior water usage, does that meet the state requirement and so forth. And that basically toss out all the old calculations, how do you account for water losses. This type of meter will be a big help because it can really detect down to the low flow and, from our own distribution meter to each household and so forth, and we can really get down to the nitty-gritty of, account for the quantity of the water. I hope that's answered your questions.
Yes. Thank you very much, Committee Member Perillo, or Chairman Perillo.
Okay, and Mr. Angie, one more question. What is the life expectancy of these meters? And my understanding is there's no moving part, so what is the life expectancy of these meters?
So from the warranty of the meter itself, it's in the package. So
Yes.
it's for the smaller
For the-
meter,
for the-
less than an inch, it's 20 years. 20 years on the meter integrity itself, 20 years for the accuracies. And then for the larger meter and over an inch, it's 10 years.
Okay, thank you very much. I know you have a complete package and complete information in the staff report. I just wanted the public to hear that. So thank you. Any comments by any more comments by the committee members? Hearing none, we'll take a recommendation.
Move the recommended action.
Second?
Roll call vote, please.
Member Flynn,
Aye.
Member McDonald,
Aye.
Chair Perlow.
Yes,
The motion to approve carries 3-0.
thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Angie. The next item on the agenda is Community Development Department. The subject, revision of existing fees and adoption of new fees related to the development impact fees. And it says we have recommendations and we could have staff. I'll tell you what, I'll read all the recommendations so we cover that. Number one, recommend that the City Council receive a presentation and receive public comment regarding proposed new fees and revisions to existing fees related to development impact fees. Number two, recommend the City Council review and provide comments on the new development impact fee nexus study and the development impact fee pertaining to the resolution for a growth requirement capital fee, parks and recreation fee, traffic circulation fee, storm drainage fee, underground utilities in-lieu fee, including an automatic annual inflation factor, public art program fee, and mobility fee, and amendments and additions to Chapter 15. Number three, recommend the City Council provide an input on staff's Number three, recommend the City Council provide input on staff's recommended timeframe for implementation of the proposed DIF, Development Impact Fee. Number four, recommend the City Council adopt the Development Impact Fee resolution. Number five, recommend the City Council adopt the Development Impact Fee ordinance. And number six, recommend the City Council approve the Development Impact Fee nexus study. And we have a presentation.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it's Jeff Lambert, Community Development Director for the city. I'm going to make some opening comments to just frame the conversation, and then our consultant, Allison Boulay, is here remotely, and she'll do the bulk of the presentation that's before you this morning. So a couple opening comments I wanted to make. One is, first, to be clear, this has been a group effort to get this item before the committee today. It not only had folks from the city manager's office, public works, city attorney's office, and community development for this item, it also had the housing department for the item coming up later in the day. And we've also been guided by our executive sponsor, Chief Darwin Bass, who's kept us moving along over the last several months to get to this meeting today. I also wanted to say it's clear that our development fees, development impact fees, are woefully behind schedule and out of date. And just a couple examples of when some of these fees were most recently updated. The park development fee was last updated in 1972. The growth capital fee was in 2005, the storm drain fee in 1991, and the traffic impact fee in 2007. That's just a sense of how out of date our fees are and why this is critical that we bring this to you today. I also think it must be said and has been said that this is a challenging time to come to the City Council and ask you to increase fees when our economy is spiraling down and no one knows what the future lies for our economic future. And I will note the council did receive 2 letters, one from the Building Industry Association, the BIA, and one from the Oxnard Chamber of Commerce. And clearly, both of them didn't weigh in on the particular analysis before you, but both said something to the effect of, don't do this now. Wait until the economy is strong. And so that's something you can consider, and if you want to talk about how to react to those kind of proposals, we're happy to do that during your deliberations. But it's clear that given the age of our fees, the city really has no choice but to do this today. This is long overdue and something we've been working on for quite some time. But a couple comments I wanted to make to sort of frame your discussion before I turn it over to Allison. One is, these proposed fees are based on cost of our facilities and needs to serve new development. There's a real factual basis to the fees that are before you. New development new developments do place a burden on the city's infrastructure and facilities. That's a clear, known fact. Charging fees to mitigate these impacts is a common practice. This is something that cities do all across the country, and it's a normal practice to have fees attached to new development to pay for their impact on our facilities. The amount of the fees is tied to the city's specific infrastructure and needs, so it's really hard to compare fees across jurisdictions because every city's needs are different. So we provided, and Alice will walk you through some comparisons, but it's important to know that our fees are based on our needs and should be considered that way. Without adequate such revenue, the city's facilities and infrastructure will become overwhelmed, and we won't be able to keep up with the needs of our community. Getting the city's fees in line with the impact of development on the community's infrastructure and facilities will ensure the city can maintain its quality of life and is an attractive place for private economic development and investment. The impact of development fees on development is limited when these costs are known and predictable. So therefore, it will be critical that the city consider at what stage in the development process and projects these fees will apply or not apply, and that's something the council can provide direction on during your committee deliberations. Once these fees are in place and the city implements a regular update based on the cost of construction as anticipated by your recommendation today, our fees will become predictable and development is not likely to be impacted given our already lower cost of land in the city of Oxnard compared to other parts of Southern California. So with that framing, I'd like to turn it over to Alice Boulay, who will give the bulk of the presentation remotely. Alice?
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Yes, can you just go over again the last time some of those fees were updated, so we let that sink in real
Sure.
quick?
Sure. No, I'm glad. I'm happy to emphasize that. I'll go most recent. So traffic impact fees were updated comprehensively in 2007. The growth capital fee was updated in 2005, the storm drain fee in 1991, and the park development fee was last updated in 1972.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lambert.
Sure.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Does everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. If we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So as Jeff mentioned, my name is Allison Boulay. I'm a director with Harrison Associates. I've been working on development impact fees for about the last 20 years throughout cities in California, and came on board to help the city of Oxnard look at and update their development impact fee program. Go to the next slide, please. So our agenda today is really, we're going to give you kind of an overview of development impact fees in general and a history of how we got here today. We're going to go through a brief introduction on the methodology and calculations for each. There's more detail in the Nexus study that you were provided, but we want to touch on each. And then we're going to look at the fee comparisons with other cities and then talk about the next steps. Next slide. So development impact fees were created by Assembly Bill 1600, also known as the Mitigation Fee Act. They're one-time fees on new development that are meant to mitigate new development's impact on the city's infrastructure. The premise of the Mitigation Fee Act is really that new development should pay its way. The fees can only fund capital costs, so items like salaries are not allowed except the cost to administer the program. That can be included in the program. Fees cannot fund existing deficiencies, so new developments really can't be expected to fix problems of the past. They can't fund maintenance of facilities, unless the maintenance is growth inducing, meaning that there's an increased capacity by doing the project. Fees have to be based on new development's fair share and have to pass a rational nexus test and demonstrate rough proportionality between the development's impact and the fee amount. And the city must meet annual and 5-year reporting requirements. These really demonstrate that the city is collecting and spending fees appropriately. And there's been a big push to increase the transparency of fees by the development community, including a bill that goes into effect January 1st of 2021 that requires the city to have all of their backup documentation, annual reports and such on their websites. You can go to the next slide. The city hired Harrison Associates through a competitive process to review the program and make recommendations for updating the fees. As Jeff mentioned, the city's fees really haven't been updated for quite a while, and were determined to be generally inadequate to fund the infrastructure needed to support new development. Harris worked with staff to update the fees and prepare a nexus study, as well as looking at the city's fee ordinance. And then on March 12th, we presented to the BIA and the development community to solicit feedback. Unfortunately, that was just right before we went to shelter in place. We didn't get a lot of feedback at that meeting, but as Jeff mentioned, we did get a couple letters since then, since things have changed quite drastically since. Part of when we looked at the city's fee program, we really recommended that the city update the fees in a few steps because a lot of your master plans need to be updated as well. So we do recognize that, some of the fees likely you would come back within the next couple of years to update based on master plan updates. So the first fee is the growth requirement capital fee, which is really made up of 4 components. And this funds things like your government facilities, such as City Hall and the Corporation Yard, police facilities, police vehicles, equipment, any buildings needed to house additional officers, those types of things. The fire facilities portion, which funds new fire stations, training facilities, and fire engines necessary to serve new development. And then the cultural and recreation facilities, which include things like your library, community and senior facilities. The methodology used for these fees looks at your inventory of your existing buildings and vehicles and takes the value of those, and then divides them by your current service population to come up with a cost per person in the city. Go to the next slide. This fee per person then gets calculated out to each land use based on density assumptions. So how many people per household do you have generally in a single family unit, how many in a multifamily, and then how many workers do you generally have per 1,000 square foot in your non-residential components. So you can see these are the fees here based on the different components. We do add an administrative fee of 4% to help the city cover costs of things like fee updates, annual reporting requirements, those types of things.
I have a question, Jim.
Sure.
Is 4% something that you use consistently in your field of work, or is that something unique to the city of Oxnard?
Yeah, generally the rule of thumb is about 3 to 6%. So we talked with staff and we kind of felt 4 seemed reasonable.
Thank you.
Next slide. So if we compare the fees here, this is the proposed fee, comparing it to the 2005 existing fee and showing the percentage increase. So you can see it's about 115% increase for single family, slightly higher for multifamily at 241%. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So the next fee is a park and recreation fee. And this really, it says Parks and Rec, but it's really funding park construction. And it is based on the city's general plan standard of providing 3 acres of park per 1,000 residents, in which you currently meet or exceed with your existing park acreage. The fee is really calculated by taking the estimated cost to construct an acre of parkland, dividing that by, or multiplying that by 3 and then dividing by 1,000 to come up with your cost per new resident. Next slide.
One moment, ma'am. Can we go back to that slide? To my fellow committee members, if you have any questions, if there's a lot of information here, this is going to be a hot item. I would appreciate if you have questions, ask them as it's going along, because some things will get lost. So I hope you have you take the opportunity to do that. Ma'am, on this deal about 3 acres per 1,000 people, did you look at the records of the city of Oxnard? Is that a past record? Is that current? Because there are various members of the community that are going, that number is all over the board. How did that number 3 come up?
So the 3 is actually in the general plan. It's your set standard for parks.
Okay.
Your last park master plan update was, I believe, in 2010, and it said that the city's existing park acreage was exceeded that. I believe it was over 5.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for bringing that up. Thank you.
All right, and then, yeah, so then this takes the fee, the cost per person, and equates it out to a fee per single family and a fee per multifamily unit based on the density assumptions. Again, adding the administrative fee. We are not proposing to charge park fees for non-residential uses. Some cities are moving in that direction, but that was not a decision that was made at this time. So as Jeff mentioned, the city's existing park fee was adopted in 1972, and the $250 is basically for a home of with 3 bedrooms or more. As you can see, the existing park fee is really not adequate to fund park construction. In fact, just doing a little math, it would take 2,000 homes, which would add almost 9,000 people just to construct 1 acre of parkland at your current fee. So definitely no way to get anywhere near the 3 acres per 1,000 people with the current fee. We can go to the next slide, great. So the next fee is storm drainage. The city's storm drainage fee is one of the ones that I mentioned earlier that really needs to get updated in phases. The city is planning to do a storm drainage master plan update, but in the meantime, in order to ensure that we try to get things up to current standards of cost, we're proposing to do an engineering news record construction cost increase on the existing fees, just to try to get it into a little bit better alignment until the city can do that master plan update. This does result in doubling of the fees. Again, this fee was established in 1991. The fees here are per gross acre, which is a little bit different. If you equated that out, say on a single family acre, if there were 8 units per acre or something like that, it'd be about $2,600 a unit for a single family home. It really is about impervious area on that fee. How much impervious area is increasing your runoff. So the next fee is traffic circulation. The traffic fee is based on planned facilities. So we work with the Public Works Department to develop a list of projects that are needed to serve new development in the city. And then they allocated those facilities between existing development and new development share. And they also looked at other funding sources like grants and those types of things. And the city is expecting to update the traffic model in 2021. And again, after that time, likely update the fee program. You have the next slide. So this is kind of a consolidated list of the improvements that the city came up with to be funded, that need to be funded through the fee program. So we looked at the list and new development share, took out the grants, and then subtracted. The city currently has about $7 million in funds in the traffic fee program. So we subtracted that out and then divided that by the average daily trips that are expected to be generated by future development. And then again, added the administrative fee. You go to the next slide. And then that fee is proportioned to each land use based on kind of the average daily trips that the land uses are expected to generate. This is a bit of a consolidated list from the full list that's in the fee study of just a lot of land uses. But the idea is to give a lot of opportunity, to work with developments depending on their actual daily trips. So there is a cost per trip. It's a 42% increase from your 2007 fee. And then that gets proportioned out to land uses. You can see it's kind of inconsistent in the increase, and in some cases there's actually a decrease in the fees, and that has to do with the ITE trip generation manual that gets used for these things. They update that over time, and really it changes based on new trip data that they have and changes in driving patterns and things like that as time goes on.
Question, the previous slide, please, 15. Down here we have gas stations. It says per fueling station. Does that include electronic plugins, or are they somewhere else? As society is moving to electronic plugins, are we having a fee for that increase at all?
That is a good question. I can talk with staff about that and see if that is something that they want to include and clarify that. I mean, obviously that creates trips to the gas station, so I think that would be a logical decision. I think we need to look and see if there's an ITE trip generation rate specifically for that.
Thank you very much.
Great. All right, and then the next fee is the mobility fee, and this is actually the only new fee that we are proposing. Everything else was just an increase on the existing fees. It's become more common practice to separate out mobility improvements, which include things like sidewalks and bicycle paths and things like that, from the traffic fee where they traditionally kind of used to be held. And the city in 2011 approved a bicycle and pedestrian facilities master plan. So this fee would provide funding for that master plan and those improvements that were identified there. It's really based on an existing inventory method, which is basically looking at your current bicycle and sidewalks and taking the value of those on a per person basis for your existing population, and then translating that cost per capita out to your different land uses. So that was how this fee was established. The next fee is a public art fee. Again, this is an existing fee that was established to fund art throughout the city. It was established in 2006, and it was based on a 1% value of the building. So in order to keep up, inflate that to current building costs, we just applied a construction cost inflation adjustment, which brings the fee to 28 cents per building square foot and resulted in a 42% increase in the fee. And then the next fee is actually an in-lieu fee. So it's a little bit different, but this fee for utility undergrounding is really meant to help small developments that are less than 10 acres in size and less than 134,000 square feet. So rather than having to underground the utilities in front of their project, they can pay the fee. And it's really meant so that they aren't overly burdened by the requirement. So we use the same fee methodology that was established in 1989, and we just upgraded or updated the cost per linear foot to underground utilities, which has gone from about $191 per linear foot to about $600 a linear foot. So it was a pretty significant increase, but again, it's an optional fee. It's kind of meant, again, to help developments not overly burden them with that requirement.
Ma'am, before we leave that slide, 18.
Yes.
In your opinion, I'm asking for your opinion on this. If we do allow a fee to be paid instead of undergrounding, I understand the burden that it would put on development. But if we have several of these strung along a corridor, do you envision something in the rules or need to be added that eventually the utilities would go underground?
The idea then would be that the city would have a fund to do that. And so it might be that the third developer that comes in, you might be able to convince, them to undertake the project, or the city would undertake it. So, I mean, I think eventually you do need to, you would obviously want to have the improvements done.
In your history with your 20 years in working, have you seen any restrictions where the first developer, second developer, they get this opportunity, but the third developer, his fees have to be added to whatever's been collected, and then the city has to come up with enough to underground the whole area?
I am
The reason I asked that, we would end up with a city, one section of the city would look, everything's underground, the other section of the city, because of concessions giving, will look like a different city.
Right. Yeah, I haven't seen very many cities, to be honest, that actually have a utility undergrounding fee. I don't know if Rosemary, if you had anything you wanted to maybe add on that.
Okay, I can wait till the end, but thank you.
Okay. We can go to the next slide. All right, so these are the fee comparisons we put together, and I'll just add that, and I think Jeff kind of hinted about it, and in fact, impact fee comparisons are really very difficult, and it's very hard to get an apples to apples comparison. A lot of times other jurisdictions have not updated their fees for quite some time, similar to what you had done. And we seem to find that as a lot of the Ventura County cities have not updated their fees in some time. Goleta and Santa Clarita fees are much higher. They have recently gone and undertaken comprehensive updates and have a lot of the same fees that you have, while other cities do not. There's also different things, different development requirements. Some cities require developers to do more things, constructing like their half street improvements, putting in their utilities, those types of things. And other cities maybe don't have those requirements. And so for these fee comparisons, we did just include the fees that we were updating, which doesn't include your Quimby fees, and it doesn't include your water and sewer connection fees. The city of Ventura only has, they have growth, traffic, and park fees, whereas Thousand Oaks and Camarillo actually had traffic fees. And as I mentioned, Goleta and Santa Clarita pretty much had comprehensive, set of fees. So if you look at the chart on the left, that's single family, and the chart on the right is multifamily. The green on the left shows what the proposed Oxnard fees are. The orange is what the existing fees are, and then the line kind of going through the middle is the average of the other cities. So you can see that the proposed fees are higher than the average of the other cities, but less than Goleta and Santa Clarita, higher than your Ventura County cities, as is the case for both of these. Go to the next slide. And then this fee, same thing, but shows retail and commercial land uses on the left and office on the right. You can see that with the retail commercial, you're fairly in line with other cities and below the average. The office is a little higher. We do have two separate fee categories, one for office and one for medical office. Medical office would be lower because the traffic fees for medical office are lower. You can go to the next one. And then this shows the fee for light industrial. Again, a little higher than the average. I want to mention that warehouse would be lower because the traffic fees for warehouse are lower than a light industrial use. But again, less than Goleta, a little bit more in Santa Clarita in this case. And then on this last one, we wanted to kind of show a little more comprehensively. We just did a single family unit, but we added in water and sewer connection fees for all of the agencies. And you can see that in this case, Oxnard is very close to the average with those other fees added in. The city is not updating the connection fees at this time, but they do intend at some point in the future to look at those comprehensively as well. And I think we can go, yep, there we go. So next steps, the proposal is that we would be going to City Council on May 19th for the first public hearing. On June 2nd would be the second reading of the ordinance, and then the fees can't go into effect until 60 days following the final action by council, though City Council could certainly choose to push that out to a later date if they chose. And I think that is it. I'm going to turn it back over to Jeff.
Chair Perello, just a couple comments. One, I failed to mention at the beginning, there are two other fees that are noted in the report. One is the Affordable Housing in-lieu fee. That's going to be considered by the Housing and Economic Development Committee later this afternoon. And the other is the parking in-lieu fee, which we will bring back to the committee separately over the summer because it also requires some amendments to our downtown code that was adopted last year. So with that concludes the presentation. All those departments that I referenced earlier are all either in the council chambers or available remotely if you have any specific questions.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. The young lady, impressive. Thank you. Your knowledge. Thank you very much. City Clerk, do we have any public comments on this?
No, not on this item.
And Mr. Chair, this is Jeff again. Sorry, I will also say two questions that were raised on the gas station, electric charging stations, and then the question about the undergrounding and how that would affect multiple properties. We'll get back to you before it goes to the full city council, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. My fellow committee members, do you have questions or comments?
I have a couple questions and comments.
Okay, go.
The mobility fee, is that going to replace the traffic impact fee, or is it going to be on top of the traffic impact fee?
The mobility fee is a separate fee. So there'll be a traffic impact fee and a mobility fee.
Okay, and the park development fee, is that what I call it Quimby funds? Is that going to be in lieu of Quimby funds?
No.
Or is it going to be on top of Quimby?
It's on top of Quimby. There's two separate fees that would be charged. The Quimby fee is not subject to this discussion, but the parks development fee is what's before you today.
Okay, I just some observations. I have a little bit of sticker shock looking at this, and I've sat here all morning reading this thing. And I realize that we haven't done any park development fee increase since 1972, which was 48 years ago. But to try and catch it all up in 1 or 2 years, I think it just doesn't work for me. It's not the community's fault that we didn't do it. It's our fault, but we need to figure out a way to deal with that. I have a real problem with increasing fees that much in that short a time. You know, and a couple just observations. Camarillo does not have a Parks and Recreation group within the city. They have the Pleasant Valley Park and Recreation District, which is its own district. And I couldn't see whether they imposed any fees independent of the city or not on new developments. But I'd be curious about that. So to me, it's kind of an apples and oranges. And while it's nice to compare ourselves to Santa Clarita and Goleta, the demographics of our community are vastly different than those two communities. I'm having a real problem with this. I'm struggling right now because of people are out of work, they're losing their income. And even though there's a moratorium on evictions and everything else, at some point in time, when COVID-19 is declared to be over, people are still going to be in the same financial crisis. And ultimately, these fees are going to go to the end user, who are the people that rent the apartments or rent the houses or buy the property, what have you. And I'm struggling with the fact that they may be challenged to meet those increased fees, but I also recognize as a community, we have to increase fees. We have to find some way to do it. I'm just not sure this is completely balanced in a way that I'm comfortable with at this point. So I will leave it at that and defer to other council members or committee members.
Okay, thank you. Mayor?
Yes, thank you very much. I want to thank the presenter, Allison Boulay, for her presentation. I'd like to go back to the slide of the benchmarking of comparing cities. If we could just take a look at that, kind of do a quick run through that again.
Which slide number, Mayor?
I don't know. I'm sorry. They were the slides on comparing where Oxnard is compared to the other cities, just to take a look.
We'll get it back up in a second.
Okay. Okay, so one of the policy issues that the council has to make a decision about is exactly what Councilman McDonald and Committee Member McDonald just made a reference to. And the one thing I've seen, and again, I said this in the previous committee, if there are lessons from history. Committee Member McDonald's right. We're in a particularly difficult situation right now. There's no question about that. But Oxnard traditionally has had an approach of keeping fees lower than neighboring communities, and it's a philosophy that if you have less fees, if you charge less fees, then it's gonna, then more development will come as a result of that. It'll make it easier to develop in the community. And certainly that's a plausible theory. My concern here is that if, I'm not saying completely adopting all the fees, because I think he's right. I think we should take a critical look at each one of the categories and really decide what's excessive and what's not excessive, rather than be very broad and say to the city council, well, Committee Member McDonald had some concerns for this reason. Committee Member Flynn had concerns for this reason, rather than making some very specific recommendations to the full council. So that's really what I'd like to do, is make specific recommendations to the full council that we're supposed to be the experts in public works here as committee members, and they're looking for our leadership. What I think to help make for me personally, Mr. City Manager and committee members, what really helps me is benchmarking, looking at comparable cities and trying to see, look, one fee hasn't been raised since 1972, and it goes on and on and on. Where are we going to be? And we had this very similar discussion, just going back to history, about the wastewater plant. For years and years and years, the city council might have raised fees, but did not raise them sufficient enough to run the plant. And we had a recall election over that. So when these fees aren't raised incrementally, that's the word, incrementally, and they're not raised in a responsible manner, then the whole leadership is challenged. So that's my concern if we don't raise these fees. The last thing I want to say, and I'd like to get those slides back on if we could, on the benchmarking, on the communities. The last thing I wanted to say is about park space. One of the things Committee Member McDonald said was, when we're comparing to other communities, we're a different community. Oxnard has one of the densest, I think the fire department data I was given about 8 years ago was a study on density that I think was taken from the last census. And Oxnard had at that point, the information I was given by the fire department, because for their planning purposes, they take a look at this. It had the 8th largest in the country, not in the county, not in the state, the 8th largest per household count of people. We are already a very densely populated city, and my concern is when there's not enough space to recreate. So that's my concern about the parks. So let's take a look here, comparison to surrounding areas. So we have impact fee. I'll try to get through this as quickly as possible. Impact fee comparison for single family, and then multifamily. So we see where the average is for single family is 17,000. And then we see what Oxnard is, so our existing fee and what it's proposed to do. So I think where I feel most comfortable is obviously what's going to benefit the city the most is, raising them all the way to the proposal. That's what's going to benefit the city. I mean, I'm talking about city government. Is that going to benefit the residents, and is that going to benefit the development community and these other entities that all are in that framework? I think it's hard to say. Here's what I have a concern about. I have a concern about the benchmarking here with Camarillo, with Thousand Oaks, with Ventura, at least those cities, and some of those cities do have a lot more money, per capita than we do. In other words, their budgets, they have more money per capita, per resident. But when we take a look at our proposed fee compared to Ventura, Thousand Oaks, and Camarillo, I have a real concern about that. So to be specific about it, I don't know if I can go for the whole fee increase recommend to the committee, to the full council, a full $30,000. I'm acknowledging that if we did do that, it's going to be positive for city finances, but I'm sensitive to the fact that not only of the existing circumstances, but in a longer term sense, I would like to be somewhere in the middle. I mean, that's generally my thing here. So if the average is 17 and we're proposing 30, I mean, we're looking at almost doubling what the average is. I don't know when Ventura, Thousand Oaks, and Camarillo last raised their fees. Going over to the right, impact fee comparison multifamily. I'm not even going to take Santa Clarita and Goleta, but I'm going to take the other cities in the county. You see that their fees for multifamily are even lower, and the average is 11.9. So I think the committee would be best served if it's pretty hard for us to do that on the fly also. But this is so important for me. Is there another comparison slide okay, there we go, non-residential uses. So here we see where we're maybe for the commercial retail, we're a little bit more in line with other cities in the county. And I hate to bring up the fiscalization of land use, but we all know that that building commercial retail from a sales tax perspective generates more, and then by building homes, that consumes more sales taxes, and so maybe that's why those fees are the way they are. I'm not quite sure, but I just think here this is more reasonable. The retail commercial, we see that the proposed is somewhat in line with the neighboring cities. And then let's take the office space, and there, once again, we kind of vastly exceeded. So I'd like to say to my committee members that I'd rather be somewhere in the middle, and that means that maybe we're going to be higher than Ventura, Thousand Oaks, and Camarillo. But when I say the middle, compared maybe to the other cities, and it's really hard for me to know about Santa Clarita and Goleta, some of the more specifics. But if I were looking at all the cities in the county, I would want to use that more for benchmarking as a gauge. Is there one more slide? And then here we go for overall, I guess, right? Impact fee. Oh, light industrial. I see. Once again, we're vastly ahead of those other entities. So the fees need to go up. We know that, but I think we can't price ourselves out of the market. And one of the things about don't do it now, I believe we do need to do it now. And you know what? But we need to be more measured in how we do this, and in terms of benchmarking. And to conclude, if we want to create a subsidy beyond where we think the fees need to be, if we think as an incentive that we have to, sometimes in development agreements that's actually done, There's all kinds of things that can be done to work with developers of residential, non-residential, commercial, industrial, everything else. Sometimes it's staggering when they pay the fees and maybe working with them on the fees, that kind of thing. I'm not talking about each and every person that our fees aren't set in place, but if the council wants to set aside money for making those decisions, it's no different to me than we get other requests for money from nonprofits as an example, and it's kind of a hocus pocus game of who do you give the money to. So I'd like to see the fees go up. I'd like to see them go up as soon as we possibly can. And if we have to make adjustments as a council or as a city to compensate for this current crisis, then we should do so. But you know what? That should come off the bottom line of the general fund if we're going to do that. And it's just simply prioritization of spending. When we don't raise the fees, if we look at the history is just like with the wastewater rate increase. This is not done often enough, primarily because it's not popular to raise these fees. So anyway, Mr. Chair, those are my comments.
Mr. Chair, this is the city manager. If I may chime in to try
Yes.
to encourage the council. So a couple points. Yes, when we have these new fees being proposed, it is sticker shock, many of these fees. But the shock really isn't the fees. The shock really is about the fact that the city neglected to update
Yes.
these fees over the years and decades. With regard to benchmarking to other cities, please remember and keep in mind that some of these cities are newer cities and they were master planned, and they have a much higher land costs than we do. So if you're a developer and you're looking at development opportunities, you factor everything in. So it costs a lot more to acquire land in many of these other cities than here. I mean, I would argue that Oxnard is really, in terms of land cost, is bargain basement when it comes to Southern California coastal communities. Also, if you look at how outdated our fees are, the development community has had, in essence, years and years, or if not decades, of discounts to do business here in Oxnard. And then finally, we can't subsidize, and we don't have, I mean, our general fund is at its bottom. So we don't have any money to set aside to subsidize developers going forward. So I would argue that we need to update these fees as they've been studied. Again, these are not numbers that we on staff are coming up with. These are carefully studied. And in fact, this process has taken probably over 2 years now. So we've given considerable study with this, and we've debated amongst ourselves on staff in terms of some of these sticker shock items. You know, should we recommend implementing them over a multi-year cycle? But in the end, whatever we don't do here in terms of updating the fees, we are in essence subsidizing from the general fund. So I wanna repeat some of my key points here. The land cost in these other cities is much higher than here. So I do not believe that updating our fees to be adequate would discourage future development opportunities here in Oxnard. These fees have, in essence, provided a drastic discount to the development community over prior years. And I think we will be fine, and we need to do this. We cannot continue to subsidize these development costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if you wouldn't mind, could I just make a quick comment in regards
Sure.
to what the city manager
Sure.
had to say? Mr. City Manager, thank you very much for that clarity too. What I think would have been helpful here too is if land costs are in fact a discount here, they're less. For me, that would factor in this overall decision, and it would be helpful in our analysis connected to fees to say, well, we might be raising it like this, and if you compare it to neighboring cities,
it looks like it's a lot larger, but in fact, here's the next slide. Here's what the cost of land is in Ventura, Thousand Oaks, or Camarillo compared to Oxnard. So I think you're probably absolutely correct that the land costs are less, but I don't know how much less it is. And then to make a policy decision on speculating how much less that land cost is difficult. So that's number one. And the last thing is this. I agree with you. When the fees are kept artificially low, we're subsidizing these things through the general fund. But it's never clear how much that subsidy is. None of us could actually say right now. No, there's no one on the council, including myself. I shouldn't speak for the other members of the council, but I can't, for one, as even the chair of the finance committee, I can't tell you specifically how our fees by being kept artificially low, and therefore we're subsidizing. I can't tell you what net effect that's had on our general fund. So I'm saying that we should find that happy medium of where we're willing to raise the fees. And if in fact we decide we're going to do any subsidies, it should be made abundantly clear to everybody that makes budgetary decisions, where is the cost going to be and what in the general fund will take a hit as a result of that subsidy. So anyway, that's just my comment.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Brian, go ahead.
And I will echo some of the comments that the mayor just made. I appreciate the city manager's comments and information he gave us, but on the legal side, we would talk about assuming facts, not in evidence. I don't know the cost of property in other communities like Santa Clarita or Goleta or anything else on an acre average. I can tell you that we have some acreage here. The closer you get to the beach, it's probably much more expensive per acre than some of the other communities, but I don't know. I don't have the numbers. I can't compare them. So I'm a little uncomfortable about that. I recognize the need to increase revenue. I don't have a problem with that, but I am not comfortable with this proposition at this point in the current shape it's in.
Any more?
Mr.
No.
Chair, our city attorney's office would like to jump in and add a few comments.
Okay.
Yes, hello, this is Tara Mazzanti, Assistant City Attorney. And just to follow up on the notion of subsidies, obviously that is something that we try to avoid. AB 1600 has put this impact fee process in place to try to relieve general funds from having to subsidize the construction of infrastructure for new development. So with that, the fees that have been presented to you in the Nexus study, those are fees that can actually be ultimately adopted at a lower amount than what is being proposed to you today. So that is something definitely to keep in mind, because there is legal requirements for maintaining infrastructure. And with that, if you are not consistently updating your impact fees, you're running the risk that the general fund may have to end up in that position of having to subsidize the infrastructure. So I just wanted to clarify that legal point.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mazzanti. It's very helpful to this discussion.
You're welcome.
I'd like to weigh in on this thing. Number one, right off the bat, the three committee members have lived here for multiple decades in Oxnard. Some were born here, some came as kids, some came as adults, but we've been here multiple decades. And when we hear fees had not been increased for a period of time, and we're talking about, it could hurt the general fund, it could, impact people and various things. One of the impacts of people, and this is not what we're talking about in this item, but you can drive through areas of the city of Oxnard and just feel by the rattling of your car, find out where things have been impacted and where they haven't, and for how long, being that we've been here for decades. Some of the staff has not, but we've been here for decades. And so these costs, as far as impacting a big jump right now, tremendous, staggering. No other ways to put that. But look at those areas where your car rattles and shakes and we avoid going because of the situation in certain parts of our city. Because we have not, and I don't mean the two other committee members here, council members have been very reluctant to raise fees because the business community, which if there was not a business community, there would not be work for the people that live here. Business is important. making money is important, but paying the fair costs involved is much more important. And I will equate it to something I am aware of personally. Great grandparents made sacrifices for their children. Those children made sacrifices for those children. And those children made sacrifices for the generation coming up. It is no different than now. And the sacrifices that have been made were for a better quality of life. When we do not provide that better quality of life based on stepping on the backs of the people that have made sacrifices to put up with situations that have been going on for decades in this community, we do not serve our residents well. This is basically a kamikaze statement from an elected official. Raising the fees, if we don't raise them, the mayor gives me credit for saying kicking the can down the road. Well, others have said it way before me. I'm just copying, plagiarizing. That's what we're doing. We have a resident, very prominent resident, who continually talks about there's not water parks. We don't have the things for the water. If you will recall, I asked during this presentation about the acreage for 1,000 people. Those numbers are being moved around. That's a hot issue. I am not saying something's going wrong, but to make it up in one fell swoop, Mr. McDonald is 100% right. It is tremendously painful. But the demographics of the community, and as the two letters that were alluded to came in, the demographics vastly different in these communities. But one thing that is not different in the community of Oxnard, all the residents benefit from living here. Some more, some less. But one thing I benefit from living in Oxnard is something called coastal climate, which is what our city manager alluded to. I see Ventura and Goleta, the only other two that would be that I could allude to that would benefit from coastal climate. The others cannot. The others may be newer. Land value, the issue that's been brought up about land value, you have brought up an excellent point. I kind of find it hard to believe that land costs more in Santa Clarita than it does in Oxnard, based on coastal climate. When it comes to the costs and how much we would implement the fees, I don't have a crystal ball to know that. But just suppose the virus had not hit. We wouldn't be talking about how this is going to impact our general fund as much as it would, and that is kind of like an example of something oh no, we can't do anything now. Well, we didn't do anything in the past, and there was no virus then, and we're not going to do anything now possibly, and there is a virus. So I'm just assuming, and assumptions can get people in trouble, but I'm assuming it isn't going to get better. It's going to get worse as we go forward if we take no action. There cannot be, when you are going to eat an elephant, you don't do it in one bite. You take a little bit at a time, but you don't stop. And the herky-jerky of this community and things that have happened in this community, whether it's leadership, management, revitalization of certain areas, bringing in new things into the community, absorbing developers' issues. One thing that I am very close to, and I know this because I live in a school district where this became a very hot issue, was River Park, Vineyard Avenue, and the high power lines. Those power lines were supposed to be underground, but they didn't go underground. That's specifically why I asked the question about if we give concessions to small developments. Well, eventually, when do you pay the price? And I know I get challenged tremendously that I shouldn't bring up certain things, but I will give you the best example I can on this. When you reach a certain age in your life, if you're lucky enough to get to that age, they recommend you get a colonoscopy to find out if everything's okay. Not comfortable, not pleasant. Put it off. Mm-hmm. You get a little bit older, if you're lucky, you put it off. You get a little older, put it off. You get a little older, you put it off. Eventually, one day you got a problem, and you find out it's serious, and you find out it's really serious. Who do you look at to blame when you have put it off all of those opportunities you had to do something, to find out, and possibly, if you'd found something, fix at much lower cost or damage to your system? That's what I see this is. We've paid money for this service. The young lady that spoke, she sounds like she's very sharp. This has been identified as a process that's taken a 2-year process. And I'm not saying to impact all these fees at one shot, but gentlemen, I don't have kids by my choice, but there are people in this community that are adults with grandkids that they were grandchildren at one time, and there are areas that have suffered because fees were never raised appropriately because it was uncomfortable. As elected officials, health, safety, and welfare are the 3 biggest things we can ever do. There comes a time you got to face the music. I am in support of raising these fees to the best of our ability without doing the damage that is apparently going to cause, and yet still survive as a community and not be in this spot for the next person that sits in my seat wondering, why didn't Bert do something? Or Brian or Tim, why didn't we do something? And I'm not showing any disrespect to my committee members. This is another one, just like the economic, and Brian was not able to see it, the item on the previous committee meeting. This is, we got to face the music. We got to face the music. And when we get organizations that are very much looking out for their memberships, you know, giving us their views, which is very important, we need to consider that. But we also need to consider the numbers of people that live in the city and the quality of life that they have and what they have done to get us to this spot. And we cannot patch. We can't continually patch with limited resources. I mean, I have no idea. None of us have asked, me including, how much money would we have had if we'd have had the fees where they should have been, and what could we have done with that? It won't do us any good to know that, but I hope we never forget that. If any other council member or any more comments, I'd entertain them.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I understand that we need to increase fees. I'm just not comfortable making that recommendation at this point as to how much we increase them. I would support recommendation 1, 2, and 3 to move this forward to council, but I would not be able to take a position on 4, 5, or 6 at this point. And that would be my motion.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor.
And let me just take a look at that. So Councilman, Committee Member McDonald would like 1, 2, his motion is that 1, 2, and 3 be forwarded on to the council, but he's not ready to recommend 4, 5, and 6. Is that correct, Committee Member McDonald?
Well, the whole issue would be forwarded to council for further discussion. I'm just not going to take a position on 4, 5, or 6. If the two of you would like to do that, I'm fine with that also.
Yes, that would be the recommendation, Councilman McDonald, if I can understand this, that would be a recommendation going forward as bringing it to the council. They would hear this presentation, but the committee, if they approved your recommendation, would come with a vote on 1, 2, and 3 and not on 4, 5, and 6.
That would be my motion. Now, if the other two committee members would like to support 4, 5, and 6, that's your choice.
Okay, we have a motion, and I don't know, I have not heard a second, but just so that we understand, I'd like the clerk to read 1, 2, and 3 so that we are clear on what the motion is, and then we can see if we get a second, please. Ms. Clerk?
Mr. Chair, can we try a little discussion here
Yes.
with this motion on the table?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, it's Jeff Lambert. A couple things I wanted to add. One, I want to make the point that we made in the report maybe more clearly than we did today, which was the lack of increasing the fees actually has a potential of negative impact on the quality of life of Oxnard, because those developer fees we would end up with impacts that would not be kept up with the developer fees that cover those mitigations. Number two, I realize there's a concern about the impact on development. I believe, as the city manager said, that really development is really, the factors for development are cost of land, cost of labor, cost of construction, and cost of permits and process. If we end up adjusting the fees for developers that have not yet acquired property in Oxnard, they will make land acquisition costs knowing what those fees are. They'll be predictable, and I don't think in the long run, or even the medium run, any kind of fee increase will have a significant impact on our ability to attract development. And then I think the third point I wanted to make, it sounded like the council members understood the need to increase the fees, but were concerned about the sort of the rollout or the phasing in of these fees. So one thing the council could do, the committee could do as part of your recommendation, is direct staff to propose phase-in proposals to the full city council on how these fees could actually roll out over time as a way of addressing that concern raised by the council members. Also, it would give us the opportunity to also describe the impact that could have on the city's general fund obligations.
Mr. Chair?
Okay, 1 second. We have a motion on the floor. We're having a little more discussion here. Go ahead.
I like what Mr. Lambert just had to suggest, or not just had to suggest, what he just suggested. I think maybe for me as a committee member, because I'm concerned about the issues that Committee Member McDonald raised, and rather than just refer it to them and say, okay, let's not really come up with anything more clearer as a direction from the committee. I like what Mr. Lambert had to say as a recommendation. Mr. Lambert, can you just clarify that again, just so to make sure I understood exactly what you had to say?
Sure, a couple things. One, whether or not there's a timing of when these fees would be effective, and that's something, normally the fees are effective 60 days after adoption, and then they're applied to anybody that has not yet pulled a building permit. So one option is to sort of say, well, if you're already in the process, whether we say you have an approved planning entitlement, but you're not yet through building, or you have a complete planning application where you've made land acquisition assumptions, you could argue that those projects are in the process and should not be subject to new fees. So that's something we could explore if the council committee thought that was something worth doing, that would allow us to understand what the options are for rolling out the programs over some limited, I would say, period of time. And then I would also say if we do give some developer the ability to use the current fees because they have an approved planning application, we don't want that to last forever, so that that would only apply to them if they pulled a building permit within a limited period of time, so that they knew we knew the project was moving forward. We can explore those kinds of options, and they might be different options for the different fees, and make some recommendations on that to the full city council if the committee directed us to do that.
I'd like to have a question answered here. The recommendations that you've made all sound very intelligent, thought out. It sounds as if they would work hand in glove with the item that we are addressing right now, but that is not what we're voting on. Would it be better to bring this back with what you've described included in this report?
Well, you could do either one. I'm suggesting that the committee could say that you understand the technical basis for the fees before us, and that that there's factual basis so that these fees are the right fees for Oxnard's facilities and infrastructure, but you're concerned about the impacts of this significant change in fees all at once. So direct staff to come up with phase-in plans that would be presented to the city council when this comes to the full council later this year.
Committee Chairman Perrello?
Yes. Mayor Flynn, are you going to second Brian's motion? Because I will tell Brian right now, I'm not going to second his motion, and if you don't, it'll die. So I want to get that straightened out. It's on the table in front of us. I don't want to ignore it.
Okay.
Are you planning to second it?
Well, what I'd actually like to do is add a friendly motion to that, and maybe this goes too far for Committee Member McDonald, as far as just how much we raise the fees, because what's been suggested is when we do it, if we stagger it, and then also a provision that if somebody has a project that's already been approved or is at some certain stage in the development process, that the older fees would apply. So, I'm willing to consider that as kind of either a different motion or a friendly motion to Committee Member McDonald, that we address his concerns. I also have a concern about where our fees are compared to
our neighbors. And what I've just heard from Mr. Lambert is he does not think that by raising the fees, Mr. Lambert, if you could just confirm this, he does not think by raising the fees to this level, and again, I don't know anything about the land costs, and I can't make that decision, as I said before, but he doesn't think it'll deter people from developing in the city of Oxnard. Is that correct, Mr. Lambert?
Yeah, I think what's clear is if somebody has not yet acquired property and land on a price of land, often developers that they tie up property, make some assumptions about the total cost of development, and one of those big assumptions is the impact fees. So if they know what our impact fees will be and they fold that into their calculation and their pro formas, they'll make a land acquisition decision knowing what those fees are. If they lock in the land at a certain price and then the fees significantly change, the developer often can't change the price, and they're left with a significant new increase that they didn't count on. So what I'm saying is if developers have not yet tied up property and the fees are known, I don't believe it will significantly impact developers' interest in investing in the city of Oxnard.
Well, as a recommendation, Mr. Chair, I could go with that, and then.
But wait a second, you're not answering my question, Tim.
Okay.
This is one we got to put up or shut up here. You going to second Brian's motion?
Mr. Chair, I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So I would like, what I'd like to do is make a new motion to approve all of them, and that we do exactly as Mr. Lambert has instructed, that the staff come up with the timing about when these fee increases would go into effect. And the second provision would be that at various stages of the development process, when the older fees would apply. So I'd be willing to make that motion to the full council. And then I think there's room at the full council level to actually get into maybe Mr. Lambert, the information about land costs, which two committee members, myself and committee member McDonald, had a cost, as far as factoring in a decision. I would like to kind of get more information on that before I'd actually go with the full increase. So I would be willing to recommend, Mr. Chair, all of the items being recommended to us with the provision that of what has just been stated by Mr. Lambert.
Okay, that's in the form of a motion?
Yes.
Do we have a second on that? And hearing no second, I'll say the motion dies unless there's something going, and I would offer this motion. The questions and the suggestions that Mr. Lambert has brought up be incorporated in this item and it come back to this committee ASAP, and then that be taken to the city council. And I will use this as an example. We have areas of our city where we have street sweeping and we have signs that say ticketing if you don't street sweep. We have areas of our city where we have street sweeping, but we don't have signs. One area is treated differently than another. And if we do not move forward with something and we approve this as stated, and we still don't know when we're going to implement it, I believe that would create just as much confusion as the example that I gave. And I'd make that in the form of a motion.
Mr. Chair, just a comment. I'm hesitant to bring this back to committee again. My preference would be send it to council with our comments and let the whole body review it.
Okay.
Staff concurs with that. We really need to move this forward because it will also help us develop our budget.
Okay. I withdraw my motion.
Mr. Chair, I would then ask, I think this, I would agree with the city manager's recommendation, but because the motions, we've had 3 motions and they just haven't been able to, reach a consensus, I would like the comments of the gist of what each one of the committee members felt about these fee increases be memorialized so that the council at least has an idea where were the committee members on these issues, and then I think it might help better with their decision making. So I agree with the city manager's recommendation then that we, that we just refer this to the full council.
I think that's, I agree, and I would ask to include Mr. Lambert's suggestions towards the end here, all of his suggestions. How do I feel? How does the rest of the committee feel about that?
I agree.
Brian?
I agree with moving forward to council, but I still will not take a position on 4, 5, or 6.
Okay, I won't either, but there is no recommendation going forward on the item, on the recommendation. This will move forward to the council. The committee members' comments will be added, and the comments from the Development Services Director about how fees could be implemented would be included in issue, because I look at this, we have introduced a large component that was not in the staff report. And I think we need to have that addressed, because at a council meeting, an item, depending on what's on the budget, we could be slam, bam, wham, get it done. And I don't want that to happen. That's my opinion.
Mr. Chair, to be clear, we still need for there to be a motion and an action just to forward this item to the council with all those caveats.
I will make that motion.
Second.
Seconded.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Could I take a roll call vote, please?
Yes.
Member Flynn,
Aye.
Member McDonald,
And just to clarify, all we're recommending is moving it forward with all our comments and the information from Mr. Lambert, not taking any other position, correct?
Yes, sir.
I agree.
and Chair Perrello.
Yes.
Okay.
And thank you, committee members. This was painful, I know. Okay, items for future agendas. And Madam Clerk, can you make one more phone call for this guy and see if we get him, shake a leg there? And anybody have items for future agendas? Mayor?
No.
Councilman McDonald?
Nope.
Okay, I don't either. And
We're
waiting
dialing
on phone-
right now.
Okay, thank you.
Henry?
Yes.
Hi, it's Michelle,
Hi,
the
Henry.
city clerk.
Okay,
so
perfect.
you've got 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay. Hello. Just want to tell everybody hello. Hope everybody's doing great. My name is Henry. I've reached out to the mayor recently through an email. I'm very concerned with my city's growth. I see no growth in the city at all. I don't see how our city is so big and enormous, but yet Camarillo, Santa Barbara, and every other city around us looks so beautiful with parks. I don't see how we cannot charge at least 25 to 50 cents. I just feel like, at the end of the day, we could do so much for our city. And I just feel like, it takes everybody to get involved for us to do something great. And honestly, there's a lot of things that I see in the city that are not great, like not enough traffic lights at certain places, like on Channel Islands and C Street, where there could be so many accidents. There's so many places in Oxnard that I see that can look so much beautiful and better, but there's old buildings that are still there, like downtown. Also, downtown city park across from the movie theaters, it looks like homeless park. I'm sorry, but I think that park right there should just be a statue park. It should be a memorial park, something that we remember people, including you. I just feel like there's just so much great things that we could do for our city if we could just reach out to smart people that is out there, people from Oxnard College that are professors, people that understand to move the economy. Let's grow the economy. We don't need a lot of no's. I think the best thing is what we need in our city is a lot of solutions for a lot of yeses, because a lot of no's can only set us back like what's been happening for 42 years. Look at our parks. Can't even go to the parks. There's no restrooms. The porta potties have been there for months and months and months, never been changed. I mean, there's so much growth here. We can help out our city if we could just reach out to everyone. That's all I have to say, and I just want to say thank you for giving me this time, and just hope everybody stays indoors and do not go to beaches. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry. Appreciate your comments.
Thank
you. And the city manager have anything you want to say, or city attorney?
No, sir.
Okay. City attorney? No? Okay, meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.